So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Helen Rosenfeld. I'm the Executive Director with the Massachusetts Science and Engineering Fair. I'm so glad you could join us today for our speaker series. This is a series of talks that we've set up to introduce students to different career pathways and scientific endeavors, both in academia and industry. So it's meant to be interactive. The first part will be our speaker speaking to you and sharing her background, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. You're all on mute with your videos off, but at that point, or maybe not, but when we get to the Q&A part, you can either use the chat function or you can take yourself off mute and ask your questions. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker today, Rachael Bonoan. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Let me just share my screen so we can get going. Okay. Awesome. So thank you for having me, Helen. I'm really excited to do this talk today. It's something that I definitely would have enjoyed back in the day, and you will see why. So I'm looking forward to sharing my experiences and a little bit about my research with all of you. So I am Rachael. I'm a field biologist at Tufts University and Washington State University. This behind me is actually my field site in Washington State. It's absolutely gorgeous. I'll talk a bit about that in a bit. So today I'm going to talk to you, like I said, about my research as well as my path into the career I currently have. And I'm happy to take questions at the end about my path into research or my actual research. And like Helen said, if you want to ask me questions via chat, I will read them aloud if I think it's a question that the rest of the group might have, and can answer it for the whole group. Okay, so I grew up in Tiverton, Rhode Island, which is a little town just over the border of southeastern Massachusetts. So I basically grew up in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. And I graduated from Tiverton High School in 2009. So I've graduated from school 3 times, believe it or not, and you'll see my 2 younger brothers in the pictures coming up, so you can see how time has passed. So I graduated from high school in 2009. From there, I went to the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, which is in southeastern Massachusetts, just a quick 20-minute drive from the house I grew up in. And what was really fantastic about UMass Dartmouth, as far as making college accessible for me, is they had this thing called proximity tuition. So even though I lived out of state in Rhode Island, I lived so close that they let me pay less than out of state tuition. So it made it really affordable for me. And then also because it was close, I got to commute to school, which may not be that attractive to everyone, but in commuting to school, I got to live at home for a few more years and enjoy my mom's cooking and save a lot of money when it came to room and board. So UMass Dartmouth was a great place for me. I made a lot of great friends, even though I commuted, and that commuting definitely made it more affordable. I'll talk more about biology at UMass. So you can see my brothers have gotten a little bit bigger now. I don't call them my little brothers because they are for sure not little, but they are still my younger brothers. So from UMass Dartmouth, I moved up here to Medford, Massachusetts, to pursue my PhD at Tufts University. And if some of you are zooming in from other areas in Massachusetts, Medford, Somerville area is the greater Boston area. So I'm just north of the city in Boston. And you can see my brothers have gotten much larger than me now. And my hat now has gotten a little bit funnier looking. So I've been in school for a long time, but I've always loved school and I've always loved to learn, especially about the world around me. So for my PhD at Tufts, I studied honeybee nutrition. And here's a cute little honeybee. And one of my projects investigated why honeybees tend to prefer dirty water over clean water sources. And this is a really interesting question when it comes to honeybees, because beekeepers, they take care of their bees and they give them clean water sources. And water is really important on a hot summer day, just for a bee, just like it is for us. So even though these bees are getting clean water given to them by their beekeeper, they tend to prefer drinking water from puddles that look kind of dirty like this one, or I've heard beekeepers tell me about compost piles and swimming pools and bird baths. There's even a beekeeper who lives near a dairy farm, and his bees like to drink from puddles on cow pies. So that's really dirty water. So what I did to look at why honeybees like dirty water is I worked with a bunch of different interns at Tufts University over 2.5 years. So this was a long-term study. And one of the first things we had to do was train honeybees to drink from these plastic tubes full of different water solutions that we were testing. So these bees right here, they're sticking their little tongues underneath the cap and they're drinking water. We had to watch the bees while they were drinking the water. So here's Taylor. She was a visiting student from Pennsylvania, helping me out that summer. And then we also tracked what was happening inside of the hives. So this is Marlene, and this is what we call an observation hive. And an observation hive is just a smaller beehive with a nice layer of plexiglass that allows you to observe what's happening inside the hive without really bothering the bees. And what we found after 2.5 years of looking into this question is that honeybees actually use dirty water as a way to supplement their floral diet. So honeybees and other insect pollinators visit flowers for food. Pollen provides protein and carbohydrates provide, nectar provides carbohydrates and lipids. And both of them provide some amounts of vitamins and minerals. But what we found is that the bees actually visit water sources based on the mineral content of the water source and the minerals that they're not getting from their flowers. So bees really like to go to water with sodium in it, and pollen and nectar is super low in sodium. So that's like table salt. And so it turns out dirty water is essentially Gatorade for honeybees. They're using it to supplement those minerals in their diet that they might be losing. So that was a bit about what I've done for my PhD. I did a lot more with honeybee nutrition and behavior. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about honeybees. I'm always happy to talk bees. From Tufts, I transitioned into what I'm doing right now, which is called a postdoc. So a postdoc is kind of this weird in-between internship for if you finish graduate school and you want to be a college professor. You do this postdoc, which gives you more research experience and a little bit more independence as far as leading your own research. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm employed by both Washington State and Tufts University, which has been fantastic because I get to spend 3 to 4 months out of the year in this beautiful prairie in Washington State. And then I spend the rest of the year at Tufts teaching classes about insect pollinators, analyzing data, and writing papers. So it's been great to experience a new area of the US. So in Washington State, I study this adorable butterfly called the Puget blue butterfly. And it's called the Puget blue, one, because it's only found in the South Puget Sound area in Washington. So that's where Puget comes from. And blue is a little bit obvious. It's got this brilliant blue wings. So this is a male Puget blue butterfly with his brilliant blue wings. And he's sipping some nectar from this flower. So you can see his little tongue there. And I study the species that these butterflies interact with. So in this case, this adult butterfly is interacting with this flower as a way to get nutrients. But one of the really cool things about this butterfly that we don't know much about at all is the species it interacts with when it's a caterpillar. So all butterflies begin as caterpillars. This is a Puget blue caterpillar, which the caterpillar itself is obviously not blue. It's this bright green. It almost kind of looks like a Sour Patch Kid. And caterpillars are pretty slow, they're soft, and they're squishy. And so they're vulnerable to predators like spiders or wasps. And a way that they can protect themselves is by interacting with ants. So when a Puget blue caterpillar is threatened by a spider or a wasp, it signals for help either by scent or sound. We're not sure which one it is. And what happens is ants respond to that signal for help and they protect the caterpillar. And they can protect the caterpillar through a few different types of behaviors. They will either patrol the plant the caterpillar is on, so they'll just walk up and down and around the plant. They can stand on top of the caterpillar until the predator goes away. And in some cases, the ants even pick up the caterpillar and carry them down to their colony where the caterpillar will stay safe. So once a threat has passed and the caterpillar feels protected, it secretes this teeny tiny droplet of sugar, which you can see right here, as a thank you to the ants. And so the ants get a little bit of a snack and the caterpillar gets some protection. So one of the things I'm studying is what species of ants actually interact with these caterpillars, how do they protect them, and how do they affect the survival of the caterpillars and then the butterfly population down the line. So in addition to this, we also look at some of the things the butterfly is doing. So here is me looking at a lupin plant, searching for caterpillars, because to study these guys, you have to find them. And we're searching lupin plants because these butterflies are what we call host specialists. So they only lay their eggs on one species of plant. And here's Hannah measuring how that plant is growing over time in different areas of the prairie. And the caterpillar will only eat this plant in order to develop. We also track the butterfly population on the prairie. So this is Hannah again. And you can't see because the Puget blue butterfly is quite small. It's about an inch in wingspan. But she's holding a Puget blue butterfly and giving it a little unique mark with this Sharpie. So we can do what's called a mark recapture study to see how the butterflies move on the prairie and how big our population is. So during the field season, I spend pretty much all day, every day outside, which I absolutely love. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Unfortunately, this year, because of all of the COVID-19 and travel restrictions, I'm unable to go to my gorgeous prairie. But Hannah, who is from Portland, Oregon, is out there doing some work. So I'm virtually leading field work. And thankfully, my boss has given me a new field work task and that I can do in this urban area of Medford and Somerville, right near my home. I'm serving local gardens to see how friendly they are for pollinators like bees and butterflies. So that has been a lot of fun. I get to walk around outside, even though I'm not in Washington. So it probably won't come as a surprise to you, but I have always loved to be outside. And when I talk to my friends and family about what I do on a day-to-day basis for my job, they're really not surprised by this at all. So whether I was at the zoo with my little kid binoculars, fishing with my parents, or hanging out by the shoreline, I've loved to be outside, but I've also always loved to ask questions. And it's not going to come as a surprise to you after listening to me speak right now, but I've especially liked asking questions about insects. So I would spend summer nights outside with my dad, collecting insects and asking questions about them. So how do June bugs get so big? What causes them to be able to hook onto things with their feet? What's up with those spots on ladybugs? Why are caterpillars so fuzzy? So I'd ask these questions, I'd make observations, and I'd do my own research. I was doing science, but I didn't realize that I was doing the beginnings of science because I couldn't relate to it. So the beginnings of science is make an observation and ask a question. But in school, we learned about space and the stars, which for me, I couldn't relate to it. It was too big. We learned about the layers of the earth. Again, hard for me to relate to. I couldn't actually see it. I'm a very visual person. But the kicker really was that my vision or image of a scientist was a man with crazy hair and a lab coat and goggles mixing chemicals. And that was obviously not what I was doing in my backyard, but also I didn't look like this. This person didn't look like me. I found science mainly because of the mentors and people in my life. So my first mentor in science, looking back now, I realize was my dad. He embraced and encouraged my curiosity and allowed me to ask questions in our backyard. And then my next mentor in science was my high school biology teacher, Mr. Saunders. So my senior year of high school biology, we were in science class, and Mr. Saunders brought bowls of goldfish, like living, breathing goldfish, into class. And I was so excited. And we did an experiment with these goldfish. And that's when it kind of clicked in my head, like I was observing this living, breathing thing and collecting data. And it's kind of the same thing I was doing in my backyard. And this is where I found that biology was where I wanted to go when I went to college. So as you've heard, I went to UMass Dartmouth, where I found another mentor in science, Dr. Pazimino. Dr. Pazimino was my biology professor, and he invited me to work in his lab studying bird behavior. So again, I got to do science on living, breathing organisms that I was able to see. From there, I went to Tufts, like I said, where Dr. Phil Starks was my next mentor in science. And Phil was what we call my PhD advisor. So he kind of oversaw my PhD and my experiments. And he always allowed me to really explore my own questions independently and embrace my curiosity, which I was super grateful for. But all my mentors have been fantastic. But my dad, Mr. Saunders, Dr. Pazimino, and Dr. Phil Starks, they were all men. And they were all fantastic mentors that believed in me and supported in me, but still I wasn't really able to see myself in them, right? I'm not a man. So I had a mentor in between Dr. Pazimino and Phil, who was a woman. So Dr. Sarah Lewis and her graduate student Natasha mentored me in an internship program I did while I was still in college. And it was with Dr. Lewis and Natasha that I was able to see women in the field doing science and really start to see myself in science. Another thing that was fantastic about working with Dr. Lewis and Natasha is this was my first fieldwork experience. So until then, the birds that I studied at UMass Dartmouth, they weren't in the field, they were captive birds in the lab. So I didn't even know what fieldwork was at this point. So Natasha and I studied butterfly nutrition. In order to do that, we had to go outside and catch butterflies. And one day I was outside with Natasha catching butterflies, and it hit me that this is something I could do for the rest of my life. I could literally catch insects, ask questions, and work outside for the rest of my life and get paid for it. So that was really a turning point in my career path as far as biology goes. Up until that point, I was a biology major, but I thought I wanted to go to medical school because that's what I thought you did with a biology major. Turns out there's a lot of other things you can do, and I'm gonna show you a few of those. But I came back from that internship with Natasha and Dr. Lewis, told Dr. Pazimino all about it, and he said to me, if you wanna go to medical school, you have to be okay with being inside all the time. And you may not be surprised, I thought about it, and that wasn't something that I was personally okay with. So I love doing fieldwork because it allows me to be outside, especially when you study bees and butterflies, because they only like nice weather. So you can be outside only when it's nice, which is great. So I'm super grateful for the mentors that I've had throughout my career path in science. And it's because of them and their support that I've really been able to embrace my curiosity and continue this path. So when you're thinking about what you might like to do in any career, any field, I would really say search for mentors as much as you can. You know, if you're interested in math, talk to your math teacher. If you're interested in biology, talk to your biology teacher. And again, your parents, my dad was my first mentor in science. Your parents can really be great mentors too. So what I know now that I am a scientist, I realize that science is actually something that you do. It's a verb. It's not a person in a lab. It's not some fancy equipment that you need. It's something that you do. It's a process that anybody can do and that you all do on probably a daily basis. So anytime you make an observation or ask a question, you're really beginning that scientific method. And you may have learned about the scientific method, but just to remind you, so the scientific method begins with making an observation and asking a question about that observation. And then you investigate your question, whether that be through an experiment or reading a book or doing an online search. And then you come up with an answer or conclusion that either answers your question from the start or leads you in a whole new exciting direction. And so every time you make an observation, ask a question, you are on your way to going down that path and doing science. And one of the things I've realized, again, now that I'm a scientist and I look back, is that my curiosity that I embraced as a kid and still embrace today is really what's made me a successful scientist. And you may not realize it, but young people like yourselves are fantastic scientists because you are naturally curious, you're still learning about the world around you, and you have open minds. So that dirty water, I call it my dirty water study with honeybees that I talked to you about at the beginning of this presentation, actually stemmed from a single observation made by an 18-year-old intern that was working with me that summer. So Georgie was the intern, and she was feeding the bees while I was in the library reading about bees. And I got a panic phone call from her. She thought the bees were going to be sick because they were drinking from what looked like a really yucky puddle. And so I went down there, I checked out the bees. They seemed to be acting normally, both inside and outside of the hive. And everything looked fine. So like any young person with a burning question, Georgie and I typed into Google, why do honeybees like dirty water? And that was word for word what we typed into Google. And what we found out is that beekeepers had been asking this question for a very long time. There were discussion forums and online chats with beekeepers asking this question, why are my bees going to my compost pile? Why do my bees like the cow plies and the dairy farm nearby? But it turns out no one had actually broken this down into a scientific study. So Georgie and I, we were the first to really break this question down into a controlled experiment. And because beekeepers asked this question, my research has gotten me invited to a lot of fun places to talk with beekeepers. So I've been to New York, Connecticut, Georgia, and even Disneyland to speak to beekeepers about my research. And it has been such a fun experience, not only to come into my own as a scientist, but also as a beekeeper and learn about both commercial beekeeping as well as backyard beekeeping. Beekeepers are scientists as well. They take care of these animals. They take fantastic notes when they're keeping their bees, and they pay really good attention to the weather. So it's a lot of fun to work with them. So whether or not you pursue a career in STEM, I encourage you to hold on to that curiosity that you have right now. It will take you places, either mentally or physically. Your preserved curiosity can lend itself to success in science, like I just described, but also in engineering, math, architecture, business, pretty much anything. If you're willing to ask questions and pursue answers, you are going to be good at what you're doing and a well-informed citizen. And when you are armed with this curiosity, I also encourage you not to close doors because of oppressive stereotypes. So don't think that you can't be or do something because what you see on television or online doesn't look like you. So I've just talked to you all about field work and how I am not one of those scientists that wears lab coats. But I don't want you to get me wrong. A lot of awesome, fantastic scientists wear lab coats. So here is an example. This is Ann Madden. She is a past lab mate and mentor of mine. And she's a microbiologist. So when she's in the lab, she has to wear protective gear like gloves and a lab coat and goggles. And here are two Petri dishes with microbes on them. And what Anne does is she's isolated yeast from insects that is now used to make fermented drinks like beer and wine. But Anne also forays into the field, so you can see she's dressed very differently, where she searches for soil microbes that can be used to create new antibiotics. We also have Jane Goodall, who's a fantastic and world-renowned primatologist who has spent years living with chimpanzees. Mae Jemison is an engineer and astronaut, and she was the first African-American woman to go to space. Sahina Farid is an archaeologist and project director at a really well-known paleontological dig site in Turkey. And Sylvia Earle is a giant in the field of marine biology and works tirelessly to conserve our oceans and educate people in the face of climate change. So as you can see, all of these scientists look very different, both in the color of their skin and the way that they dress. And they're all what we call actual living scientists. So they're not, Einstein, who you learn about and was very important, but has been gone for a very long time. These are people that are still working in their fields and actively doing science. So before I finish and take your questions, I just have a quick favor to ask you. So if you relate to my story of not relating with science because of the way you look or the way you dress, I encourage you to check out this website, Dress Like a Scientist Day. This is an illustrated ebook my husband and I just published online. So it's a short story, it rhymes, it has really fun illustrations. This one's one of my favorite, the dinosaur illustrations. So check the book out, and if you like it, share it with someone to help me and help everyone change that image of scientists that they might conjure up in their minds. The website, in addition to the book, also has profiles on actual living scientists, including Anne Madden, and some really awesome people. And then it has resources for you to do science at home. There's a really cool one with Steve Spangler where you can make your own lava lamp at home. It's a lot of fun, highly recommend. So again, science is something you do. It's not something that you are. And anybody can do science. And science can be done in your backyard. It can be done at a dig site, or it can be done under a microscope. So it's super diverse in the people that do it, the way you dress, and where you do it. So with that, thank you all for being a fantastic virtual audience. I would love to take any questions, and I encourage you all, as you continue attending and listening to this speaker series, to really think about how you can keep embracing that curiosity and maybe pursuing some of the careers you learn about. And I would love to take any questions either via voice or chat. It's totally up to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel. I feel badly that you didn't get to see everybody's expressions as you were speaking, because if it was anything like me, I was smiling very broadly with your stories, and I loved learning more about the bees. So thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what you've shared. To everyone who's on, please feel free to use the chat function and ask some questions, or you can take yourself off mute as well and participate. And I'll kick it off while everybody's having some ideas percolate for what they want to ask. But you shared your story of your interests, and it seems that early on you kind of found what you were passionate about. And perhaps you can talk a little bit about what got, you had the curiosity, but were there certain inflection points that helped you narrow it down? And did you need to be so specific when you got to college, or did some of what you explore, did the exploration happen while in college? Because I'm sure a lot of our participants are sort of still early on in their exploration process and are not quite there yet, but curious how you got to that specificity.
Yeah, so my exploration definitely continued in college. when I was applying for college, I knew I wanted biology to some level, but I didn't know what type of biology. And so one thing I encourage you to do, if you can do it at high school and with science fairs, is just get involved in research, whether it be your own research or a local university or a local lab that you can volunteer at, because that's really a great way to learn what you're interested in, but also what type of questions you're interested in. So look for those experiences. One thing, when I was going to visit colleges with my dad and going to the informational sessions, I always asked, what kind of undergraduate research opportunities do you have? And you would be shocked by what some of these universities do. Wheaton College, which is a really small school in Norton, Massachusetts, they have a baby sea turtle research program that, as an 18-year-old, I was like, that would be amazing to do. So really continue with that curiosity and ask questions, ask what opportunities are there, because you never know what you'll find. And yeah, the insect turning point for me was really catching those butterflies with Natasha and Dr. Lewis and realizing this is a job that I could have, which has been fantastic.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time we don't realize that the things we're interested in can be more than just a side project. It doesn't have to be just something you pursue on the weekend. But without those people in our lives already, it's hard to take it that next step to figure out how it could be a job and a career.
Right.
So it's always good to ask those questions. Okay, everybody's a little too quiet today on the questions. Come on, I know you have some questions. This is too interesting not to. Can you speak, you spoke at length about mentors and how important it is, but I think there's also sometimes a barrier to the asking of and understanding what a mentor does. Can you speak a little bit about how mentors have sort of, to the specifics of how they've supported you and how you've used them as a resource?
So Mr. Saunders, who was my high school biology teacher, he probably doesn't realize he was a mentor of mine. It was definitely more of a passive mentorship where he was a fantastic teacher and brought in hands-on experiments for us to do. And that really made me realize, wow, science and experimenting on animals is something that I'd be interested in. In college, the mentorship is a bit more, I guess, active, or it was active in my case with Dr. Pazimino. He was the introductory biology lecturer, so he teaches all the freshman students. And again, like I said, I was really interested in research as an undergrad because I wanted to keep asking questions. And so I approached him and asked him, do you know of any undergraduate research opportunities, right? So if you ask someone, do you know of any opportunities, you're not necessarily putting them on the spot or in the hot seat. But if they have opportunities and they think you'd be interested, they'll give them to you. So Dr. Pazimino, when I asked him that, invited me to be in his lab. And from there, I attended lab meetings with his group. I learned how to write papers. I learned how to give presentations. One of the things he was fantastic at was kind of pushing me out of my comfort zone to the point where I was a little uncomfortable, but then uncomfortable enough to succeed. So one example is I gave a presentation at a conference as an undergraduate, and the conference was on a Friday. And every day that week, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, he made me practice my talk with him, and he videotaped me doing it, which was super uncomfortable. I hate being videotaped, but it really made, I hate watching myself really. It made me realize, they have this tick, or I have this word that I keep saying. And on the Friday when I gave the presentation, I ended up winning the student competition. So Pazimino really took a very active role in mentorship. And then he helped me apply to grad school and figure out grad programs that I was interested in. And so those mentors can really not only mentor you, but they're the people that are going to write letters of recommendation for you because they know you well, whether it be applying to graduate school or college or a job outside of those things. So just, if there's a teacher you really like, just ask them what kind of opportunities there are for you. Whether it just be, hey, I really like the subject you taught, what kind of jobs are there for this? Or is this a college major? When you go to college, you will be shocked by what is a major. And it's so eye-opening and fantastic, because there are, you learn English in high school and middle school, but then in college, there are majors that are like one specific area of literature or English. And there are all kinds of paths you can take. So ask your teachers about opportunities for jobs, college majors, research, or even volunteering.
You shared something which I think a lot of the science fair students can appreciate, which is that the way you're able to communicate about things, you were sharing the story of your video and having to watch yourself, the way you're able to communicate things makes such a big difference, because you can have exceptional research, but if you're not able to tell somebody about that research,
yes,
it's a limit. And I know a lot of our science fair students, the experience of having, well, this year we were virtual, but
yeah.
In general, the experience of speaking to judges and having to communicate effectively is half the battle.
Yes.
So that's really helpful to hear.
And I mean, something a lot of scientists struggle with professionally. So it's something everyone's working on and everyone realizes is important, which is great.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about what the next steps are for you? What's the pathway ahead, and where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years?
So my postdoc, which is my current job, ends in about a month and a half, believe it or not. What flew by. And I'll be starting a position as a biology professor at Providence College in August. So I'm super excited. It's in my home state of Rhode Island. Thank you. And I'll be teaching environmental biology and pollinator ecology, insect ecology to college students in Providence. And then my lab will be kind of pursuing similar questions that I asked for my PhD and my postdoc. So academia, which is what we call higher education, is one path for what I do. But in Washington State, I work with a ton of wildlife biologists who are not working in universities, but for state agencies and non-governmental organizations. So they help me with permitting. On the prairie I work at, they do things called prescribed burns to manage it. So there are wildlife fire biologists that work on burning prairie safely for management purposes. So for field biology, there's so many paths to take. I chose academia and being a professor. I've graduated 3 times. I've been in school forever. I'm just going to be in school forever. I love school, but I will continue to do field work and get students and interns outside and involved in the research as well.
Great. Well, in closing, I would love to hear if you have any advice you'd give your high school self that students may be able to reflect on.
High school Rachel. One thing I would give my high school self in applying to colleges specifically is don't get too hung up on the name of the school or if it's a good school or quote unquote a bad school. There's so many things I got hung up on when I was applying for colleges. But really all that matters is you can afford to go there both financially and mentally and emotionally. I know for me, moving far away from home when I was 18 would have been really difficult. And so staying home was the right choice for me. So make sure it's something that you can do, but also make sure you click with the people that will be teaching you. So visit as many colleges as you can. I applied to all schools in New England, so we just took a bit of a driving tour on once in a while. Visit as many as you can and talk to the people that will be teaching you, because if you like the people that are going to be teaching you, a lot of schools have very small departments and you're going to have these professors over and over again. They can be those mentors and those writers for your letter of recommendation. Another piece of advice is if you do have an idea of what type of major you want to be, English, biology, marine biology, some schools have better experiences than others. So what comes to mind for me, marine biology, if you want to be a marine biologist, you should probably find a school on a coast because you're going to have more research experiences nearby if there's a school, if you're at a school near the coast. So UMass Dartmouth, it's right on the southeastern Massachusetts border, tons of marine biology research experience there. Somewhere in Colorado, you'll probably have a lot of cool wildlife biology experience or lab work that could be done, but not necessarily local marine research. So think about things like that as well. But yeah, don't get too overwhelmed by the names of the school and what school your friends are going to. Really focus on the people that teach there and the type of program you want.
Great, really helpful, I'm sure. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you to all of you who dialed in. We really appreciate it. And I want you to know there's one more session in our speaker series on Tuesday. So you can dial in again then. And if you have interest in certain areas that we can help with at MSEF and you'd like us to add to the speaker series, we may be able to do that in the future. If you have questions for Rachel that you didn't feel comfortable asking today, feel free to email us at info@scifair.com. And thanks again, Rachel, for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Take care.
Bye.